All right, my name is Brian Serwicki. I was in the United States Marines. I finished as a sergeant, but during the war, most of the time during the war, I was a corporal. I was involved in the Iraq War, and I was a mortarman. The job specialty was 0341. Basically infantry. So I went to the Scope Infantry in Lejeune, and then I spent an extra 2 weeks specializing on the mortar cannon. Even though I was trained on the mortar cannon, we didn't use it really at all in Iraq. We would do training. I was in the reserves throughout my time between the year 2000 and 2007, and we would train for 1 week in a month and 2 weeks out of the summer. We would do major shoots maybe twice or 3 times a year on the mortar cannon. So we'd fire maybe 100 or 150 rounds in a single shoot. Even though we trained on all that, because we were operating in Iraq in a civilian locations, obviously something like a mortar cannon where you fire from a long distance away was not something that we were going to use in a civilian area. So we basically reverted to just being riflemen throughout the time we were in Iraq. Well, I was in high school when I enlisted. Basically, I was in 11th grade, and I met with my guidance counselor, and she was talking about what my plans were for after school, or after high school. And I said I wanted to go to college, and she said, what were your plans for financing that? And I said, well, I heard maybe, and actually I was just watching a commercial while I was in the waiting room of the guidance counselor's office for like a military commercial. And I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe I'll just join the reserves or something. I think I said kind of offhandedly. And she right there called the recruiter, and I got in touch with him. And from that point on, the recruiter was very enthusiastic and told me all these great things about being in the Marines. And as a student in 11th grade, I was pretty psyched, I guess. And it was kind of being part of something bigger than yourself, I guess. Yeah. Well, actually, when I entered the military, it was 2000. So I graduated high school in 2000, and the war had not started yet. I mean, that was before September 11th. It's kind of funny. I think back at my high school years as an age of kind of innocence, not just for myself personally, but I think for the whole country. It was a time before September 11th, before everything that happened in the news somehow got connected to terrorism. I went to boot camp at Paris Island for 13 weeks in the summer of 2000. When I got back, I had gotten back from boot camp for a week, and then I went to the School of Infantry for 6 weeks of rifleman training and an additional 2 weeks of the mortarman training. And I got back by Thanksgiving, and I started up college at Canisius that January. It wasn't until the fall following that September 11th occurred, and we got a call from our chain of command, pretty much telling us to be on high alert. Being in a reserve unit in Buffalo, we were initially a cold weather unit. So we did all of our training in places like Alaska or Wisconsin, where we would camp out in the cold weather, learn how to like fight and do different things on skis. But after September 11th, we got changed from all of our training being in icy cold, negative 20-degree weather, to being a warm weather group, and we would go out to places like California and Camp Pendleton to train in the desert. Well, basic training was 13 weeks at Parris Island in South Carolina. I can still remember, that real southern kind of climate, also right near the ocean. And the air kind of had that salty kind of smell to it, and I always will associate that with my training down in Parris Island. If I go someplace now like Savannah, I recall my time at boot camp. Boot camp was actually less physically demanding than I thought it would be. It was more mentally demanding. I mean, we still did do a lot of physical things. I mean, we did a lot of working out and exercising, and there was a lot of obstacle courses and rappelling. One of the hardest physical things to do both in boot camp and at the School of Infantry were these forced marches. And so you would do a forced march for first, just maybe 5 or 6 miles, but then they would expand that to about, 10 or 12 miles. And as a Marine, you really wanted to train yourself up to the level to do about 20 miles in a single day, or 25 miles with a full load of gear, about 80 pounds of gear, plus your weapon system. And as a mortarman, you always had to carry this huge cannon around with you, as well as the mortar shells that were heavy. And machine gunners had it just as bad. They had to carry their huge machine guns with them and all of the ammunition and stuff that went with that. So that was probably the most physically demanding thing, is those forced marches. And you'd have to take care of your feet and stuff like that, make sure that you were changing your socks, make sure you had a good set of boots. But boot camp was more mentally than physically demanding. Just basic things that people take for granted, being able to go to the bathroom when you want, being able to eat, regular meals each day. Basically, you got one good meal a day at boot camp. The other 2 meals were extremely quick if you got a chance to eat anything at all. So you went around pretty hungry most of the day. And your training day was very long, and it was exhausting, and you were somewhat sleep deprived. Mostly it was just kind of things like making you do the same thing over and over again, making you make your bed over and over again, empty out your foot locker, and then put everything back into your foot locker. Sometimes they would make you dump out your foot locker, and then they would push everything around, and so you ended up with somebody else's undershirt or something. And it fostered a sense of camaraderie and a sense of teamwork between people. But at the same time, it also kept you always kind of stressed out or on edge. And everybody there, I mean, it was the military was an all-volunteer force, so everybody there wanted to be there, and everybody there wanted to do the best they could. And so you had, you were kind of constantly pressuring yourself while at the same time having all these outside demands made upon you, and constantly kind of in an uncomfortable or hungry or kind of tired position. So so it definitely helped you deal with some of the things that you would have to deal with later. And the most important thing about being in the military and being in the Marines and going to boot camp was you learned to follow orders. You had to be able to follow orders without questioning them. I mean, a lot of people, especially in my reserve unit, were college educated, and they were pretty independent and free thinkers. But in the military, you might not know the bigger picture, or you might not have that information just might not be available to you, and so you individually have to do your job and basically leave your life and your welfare in other people's hands, and that's something that's, I think, very difficult for people both at boot camp and afterwards. Well, as a reservist, I was mostly stationed locally right here in Buffalo, but we went, when we got activated in 2005, we went to California for about 3 months and trained there, just some additional training on top of the training that we had received yearly 2 weeks out of the summer. And then we flew over to Iraq. When we were in Iraq, we spent about 9 months in Iraq, and it can be divided pretty evenly into 3 months in one place, 3 months in another place, and 3 months in the third place. For the first 3 months, we were at an airfield called Al-Assad, which was a major air base, first under Saddam Hussein, and then under obviously American control. And at the air base, our main responsibility was doing patrols within the several mile circumference of the air base, and to do tower duty at night. I mean, actually, our unit was responsible for all of the guard duty in those towers, but we separated it, and our platoon ended up doing pulling most of the nighttime guard duty. So from 11 p.m. to about 7 a.m. We would basically be standing watch on these towers. Then the second 3-month stint that we were there, we moved to this area of operations near Al-Assad Air Base, basically in the Haditha corridor. And in the Haditha corridor, our first responsibility, my squad at least, or our mortarmen, our squad within our larger weapons platoon, we were tasked with basically just guarding this road. So we were put on top of this hill, which was called Observation Post Page, named after a Marine Corps Medal of Honor winner. So we were at OP Page, and we had to guard this main road and make sure nobody put IEDs and things like that on the road. So we had about 3 bunkers that we had to basically watch day and night. And we were up there for, as I said, close to 3 months. Then the final 3 months, we moved to the town of Heat, which was a populated town, again in the Haditha corridor, and did regular patrols there in the streets and in the populace. And those were the final 3 months that we were in Iraq. Yes, actually, one of the good things about being in a reserve unit is most of the people that you served with were from the local area. They were all from either Buffalo or Rochester, some as far away as Syracuse or New York City, but most of them were within this area. So I've been able to keep in touch with a lot of them, if not just face to face, then through things like Facebook and things like that. Well, when we first went to Iraq, we had been training for several months in California, so we were used to the desert heat from California. The desert had definitely more of a feel to it, a different feel in Iraq. We arrived at night, and we were just kind of put on this bus. We flew from, we basically took a commercial airliner, but again, our unit, our company was the only one that was on that plane. So we were allowed to take our rifles and stuff on the airplane, which is kind of weird, taking your rifles on a commercial airliner. Basically, we were just told to take the bolts out of the rifles and put them in our pocket, so nobody accidentally, shot their weapon while on the airplane. But so we took a commercial airliner from the United States, from out in California, Los Angeles, I think we left, all the way to Germany, going over there, and we had a layover in Germany, and then we took a second leg all the way to Kuwait, another commercial airliner. And then we took a military plane from Kuwait into Iraq. And then I just remember getting on a bus once we got into Iraq. And the bus kind of had, it was just a regular kind of bus, but it had basically these, all of the screens down, so nobody could see who was inside the bus. And the bus took us to Al-Assad, where we would be stationed for the next several months. Again, there was a, it was almost a 12-hour difference. I think it was like 10 hours, a 10-hour difference between where we were and back here in New York, and so it would have been midday back here. Our unit was, well, I mean, I was part of India Company. India Company consisted of 4 platoons, about 300 men altogether. There's a little less than 100 men per platoon. Our platoon, weapons platoon, was the biggest platoon. I had been training with them for a long time. There were some younger guys in our unit, Timothy Irish, who is now an officer in the Marines, and Greg Allen, who's a firefighter in Syracuse, who were all part of our squad, and Rafael Rivas Fernandez, who had come in from the reserve units, can do basically go on a float, go on a boat basically to all the different places in South America and show off weapons and stuff like that, and then train with the South American soldiers. And Rivas had gone with them to Unitas, and so when his unit got activated, he wasn't with them. So having missed out on going to the war with his unit, he joined our unit and went to war when we were getting activated. It's kind of funny, a lot of civilians would believe that, you know, basically that people wouldn't want to go to war. Like, why would you want to go over to war and things like that? In the military, especially in an infantry unit, I mean, that's basically all that you're training for, is doing some kind of military operation or going to war. So you want, so there's this kind of, this background desire or this pressure to basically do what you've been training for. So to go to war or to get involved in some kind of operation or things like that. And there's a tremendous pressure, especially if the rest of your unit has gone to war and you haven't. There's a sense of what some may call survivor's guilt, or the fact that you are not somehow as close with the other members of your unit as the other people who had gone to war with them. There's this shared experience. Well, the Iraq War, there was no kind of front lines in the way that there have always been in traditional wars. I mean, there were a lot of different people all around you that could be your, could be your enemy. I was kind of just talking about this, and we were reading Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic War in our Latin class, and Caesar made the mistake once of dividing his soldiers into too small of units and settling them in different winter camps, and because of that, it invited the Gallic tribes to revolt and to attack his soldiers. One of the things that we were doing, especially when we were in the city of Heat, to kind of draw out who the enemy was, because you didn't know who the enemy was. I mean, the only time you knew who the enemy was when they were shooting at you. And so to draw out the enemy, we would send out small patrols on a very frequent basis. And we would have, especially in places where we knew the enemy was going to try to attack, or in kind of darker places, to kind of draw out who the enemy was, and we would have a quick reaction force ready to go in once we identified kind of who those enemies were. So, here, wait, read that question again, the second one.
Let's see. Oh, how far from you were with front lines, and what was your first thought or impression upon setting your feet on Iraqi soil for the first time?
Okay, so you basically, the front line was pretty much everywhere, you know, so I mean, you couldn't tell like who was the enemy and who wasn't. And as I've talked to a lot of people coming back, people who have loved ones and things overseas, you know, you have to kind of applaud or support everybody who has loved ones over there, because there really isn't any place that's 100% safe. Even when we were in Al Assad Air Base, which was one of the safest places of the 3 places that we were at, there would be these occasional rocket attacks and things like that. And whenever you traveled by vehicle or anything like that, you always had to worry about IEDs or you know, mines and explosives hidden in the ground, which is what caused the greatest number of deaths. The front line, I guess, I could describe it as everywhere. We were in the Haditha corridor, which was about halfway between Baghdad and Syria. And many of the enemy combatants were coming from Syria. So they were coming in from Syria to fight the jihad war against us. So a lot of the people who were kind of fighting against us were not native Iraqis. They were from all over the Middle East, and they were kind of coming in, and they were coming in through that area. So we were kind of on the front line in that sense, right in between the major city of Baghdad and right along the Euphrates River, where people were coming in. Being on Iraqi soil, like I said, being part of a reserve unit, a lot of us were college educated and I guess pretty free thinking and stuff, and and you question, why, I'm here, I'm probably gonna have to fight or attack or be attacked by somebody I don't even know, right? Like a stranger, and is there something morally wrong with that? Was a question that I remember thinking about. But that all kind of subsides because the reason that you're there is not necessarily any greater geopolitical sense of things, but simply because of the other people that you're there with. I mean, you're there with other people you've known for a long time, that you've trained with, and you want to make sure that they get back okay, that they get back safe, that you accomplish whatever mission you set out there to accomplish, and that you all kind of stick together in the end. And that's what the primary importance is. Being in the unit that I was for such a long time, having joined in 2000 and not going to Iraq until 2005, I had gotten to know a lot of the people I was serving with very well. And to have all of them go off to war and put their lives in danger, and not go with them, and not try to do your part to contribute, seemed a greater sin than anything else. So. While we were in Iraq, as I said, when we were in Al-Assad, we would sometimes be attacked with rockets. When we were at O.P. Page, there was a major attack, and they had exploded some kind of gas line not too far away, and we could see the explosion from where we were. But at that point, we hadn't really engaged with the enemy. It was the 3 months that we were in heat that we were really in kind of military operations at all times. But the thing is, throughout the time, things would only happen about once every 3 weeks. It was almost as if it was on clockwork, kind of. You would be pretty bored for about 3 weeks, and it was easy to get kind of lackadaisical because nothing would really happen for about 3 weeks, and then suddenly a big thing would happen. There would be a big attack or something like that. The first time that our squad, the squad that I was in as a corporal, was attacked was during one of the night patrols in heat. One of the first weeks we were in heat, and we were doing a night patrol through the marketplace where there had been some intelligence that they would try to attack. And we were walking down the street, and we had come to a dark spot of the street where all the lights had been kind of knocked out. And I remember seeing tracers, and they were green tracers because we didn't use green tracers, we used red tracers. So I remember seeing tracers fly above our head. And because we hadn't really been attacked up until that point, it just kind of struck me. I think we're being shot at, and so we kind of, what probably was only a couple minutes seemed to last a very long time. The first thing we did was took a cover near this wall that was on the side of the road. Like many European cities, the city of Heat was a very populated kind of city, and it was in some ways it's probably a bigger city than Buffalo, but I don't know population-wise if if that's a factor or not. But it had a lot of infrastructure and things, and it was right along the Euphrates River. And but there were big walls on both sides of the road, so there were big stone walls. And so if you went up against the wall, the guy who was actually shooting at us, who we kind of discovered was on top of a building on the left side of where we were approaching, wouldn't have been able to hit us if we were tight up against that wall. And it's funny, the first time you're shot at, there's this overwhelming desire just to get as low as possible, just to get like on the ground, kind of, to duck as much as possible, which is probably not the most strategic thing to do, because if somebody is shooting at you from a higher elevation, you're just creating a larger target for them if you splay yourself out on the ground. So the guy was shooting at us from the left, and then we discovered there was a guy that was also shooting at us from the right. So it was almost like as if we were put into an ambush. Right before that, we were on the receiving ends of, when we were walking through the marketplace, of some mortar shells, which was also a terrifying thing, because being a mortarman myself, I know that you could be about 2,000 meters away and fire a mortar shell at somebody far away from you. And so you heard all of these huge explosions going on around you, and the walls around you were just kind of shaking. And but there was nothing you could do about it. The most strategic thing to do was spread out as we did. That way, if one round went off, very few people would get hit. So between being mortared when we were in the marketplace, which I think was meant to push us forward into the ambush site, and being ambushed on the street, in the dark area of the street, I thought it was, I think it's close to a miracle that none of us were injured or killed. There was a concussion that one person had, and one person had cut their hand a little bit on some debris that flew off the ground. But other than that, I think either somebody must have been watching out for us, or the Iraqis were just a terrible shot, because we were pretty much sitting ducks out there. But the person on the right-hand side that we found out was shooting at us as well had a pretty open sight to us, so we fired back at him, or whoever he was, and pretty soon after that the firing stopped. We then regrouped in a nearby building, and then got a radio call to go over and see if we could discover the mortar site from where they were initially shooting the mortars. We went over there, but by that time I believe the mortars had already been broken down and the enemies had escaped. I don't know if during the firefight, which probably, like I said, only lasted for about a minute or so, if the people on the right hand, if we had hit anybody or anything. I didn't get any details on any kind of after-action report or anything like that, but generally, if something happened, it might have been cleaned up before we could get people out there, or things like that. And the person on the left-hand side, I'm sure, got away. We weren't even kind of firing at that person. I mean, you kind of, a moment like that, you kind of replay it in your head over and over again, and you ask yourself, what could we have done different, things like that. And I guess we could have probably assaulted the building from which the guy was shooting at us on the roof, but it's not an easy thing to assault a building. Obviously a building is full of a lot of occupants, and you don't know if they are the person who was attacking you or not. And so when things like that happen, I think probably the best result was what happened. All of us came out okay. We didn't end up getting either capturing the mortar site or capturing the guy on top of the roof. But had we tried to do that, there's a good probability that not all of us would have been okay at the end of the night, or we might have ended up hurting somebody who shouldn't have gotten hurt. So, so all in all, I feel we made the kind of the right decisions that night. But things like that happen so instantaneously. And you always go back and think twice, I think, about every decision that you made. And I started subbing day to day, and I got a long-term sub job at Orchard Park. And while I was at Orchard Park, it was from Mr. Ongst, who works there, who was a husband of our nurse at the middle school here in East Aurora who told me that they were looking for a lab teacher here in East Aurora, and so I was able to apply to the job here just a few months after getting back. So I started here, I think, in March 2006. She didn't realize that I was in the service when we first started dating, and I remember when I told her that I had to go to drill that weekend, because drill is what we call the 1 weekend a month training. She thought I said I had to go to jail that weekend, and so she was wondering, exactly who I was and why I had to go to jail. So she kind of knew. She said it was very tough on her when I went overseas for that year. We did stay in touch, mostly by things like email and stuff like that. Every once in a while, I would get, when we were at Al Assad, I would have access almost on a weekly basis to a computer or a phone or something like that, so I would be able to call home. But once we were out in OB Page, or once we were out in the heat, I had no access to any kind of communication, so it was mostly through snail mail, just writing letters and stuff. And sometimes I would write letters on the side of cardboard, the cardboard boxes that they would put your food, your MRE and food and stuff in. And so, but letters were free too. Like once the people came around and collected any kind of letters that you had to send home, it was free to send it out. You couldn't send packages back home for free, but you could send letters and things, or anything that you wrote on. You could just address it and send it out home. So we kept in touch that way. And then when I got back, we dated for a few more years, and we eventually got married in 2009. Trying to think. Not too much. After we got back, I was in the reserves for another year or two, up until 2007, and then my contract was up, and I basically left. By that time, I had the full-time job here and everything. So, trying to think. There's nothing particular that's really connected with what I used to do when I was over there. But I still keep in touch with pretty much everybody who I served with, and especially everybody who was in my squad. And oftentimes, a lot of them are living in New York City now, even if they were originally from Buffalo or from Rochester. So whenever I'm in New York City, we get together, and we'll sometimes go to VFW. There was a VFW in Grand Island, which one of the Marines that I served with, Mike Marchard, was very much connected with, and then there's a VFW in New York City that they're trying to kind of reinvigorate and keep alive, and definitely get the people that have been serving in the Iraq War, in the Afghanistan War, more of them getting involved in the VFW there, and trying to make it an ongoing thing, because it's important to kind of reconnect with people with the shared experiences and things, to be able to talk about things or things. I remember my friend Rafael Rivas Hernandez. He was telling me how sometimes he sees on the news Marines and stuff, fighting overseas or in this operation or that operation. I mean, not so much now as several years ago, but and how that made him want to kind of re-up again or go back in and be involved in that thing. I guess there's that sense of getting involved in something larger than yourself, and he still knows a lot of guys from New York City who still serve in those units and things. And but I would always tell him how miserable he was when he was actually there. Like, it wasn't, just we were doing this operation or that operation. A lot of it was just we were sitting around, and we were filling sandbags. When we were at Al Assad, we would do tower duty from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and then from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. we would fill sandbags all day and just stack them up and things like that, and you know, you catch as much sleep between 3 p.m. and 11 p.m. again until you had to go back out again, and you know, I mean, I guess there are probably a couple of different things I'm probably not going to talk about here that you know, that you still think about often. You know, that actually there's probably not a day goes by that you don't think about that certain things. You know, that they kind of come back to you. You know, I remember even when I was over there, there wasn't a strong sense that we really believed politically in anything that we were kind of. I mean, some people are very, very hardcore and you know, my country right or wrong or whatever, but there was a sense that you were there because of the other people that were around you. You were there because you got to know these people you trained, and you know, the closeness that you felt with the people that you were with is really the most important aspect, I think, of the whole thing, and that's the whole reason why you felt you couldn't let them down. You couldn't, you know, if you had a choice and you weren't, you know, you had a choice and you could have just stayed home, why you wouldn't, you know, have made that choice. You know, I mean, there is a sense, I find out, you know, I guess now, a lot of different things about how much just different companies and corporations and things, and how much that drives so much of what we do. And you know, so I hope that, but I guess even when I was there, and for the whole time I was in the military, and even now, you know, you do feel a strong sense of patriotism, though, that our country does have certain ideals, you know, that we, I guess, need to do a better job of living up to, is the thing. And so the idea of our country, you know, the ideal is that all people are created equal, that you know, that there's this sense of equal opportunity for different people, that there's this sense of an American dream, you know, that there's a sense of participation in your government and participation in what we do as a people. You know, all of those are good things, and they are good ideals, and they're things that we every day, you know, should try to make an effort to live up to those ideals, and I don't think there's anything wrong about that. I think sometimes we don't. Live up to our ideals, or sometimes we make mistakes and things. But I think oftentimes that's just kind of a human thing. You know, one of the things while we were over there is basically, and this is something, you know, I joined the military when I was in high school and things like that, but something, if somebody was asking me, if a high school student was asking me, you know, should I join the military, you know, I would tell them that, you know, as for an experience, you will get to experience a lot of different things and have shared experiences with people that will never go away. You'll get to meet a lot of great people and things like that. And I think in some sense, I remember some people going around and if they hadn't been involved in any of the major attacks that happened, they were almost like wanting to get into like some kind of firefight, because to them it was something like, how would I react? You know, how would I react in this most extreme situation? You know, there are only certain times in your life where something happens that's so extreme, and you have the decision to make the right choice or the wrong choice, and you ask yourself, you know, what would you do, kind of, in that situation? So there are a lot of these kind of shared experiences and things like that. At the same time, you know, if you're going to join the military, be prepared to, like as I was saying before, take orders. Be prepared to do things that, you know, even if you don't do things that sometimes you just don't have any control over, or be put in situations that you don't have any control over sometimes. And you know, and I think that's one of the things that I think some people should really think about before they join the service. You know, and I know I probably didn't think about that as much as I should have before I joined the service. You know, I think most of us didn't. You know, but I think that it's something that you definitely should. There are a lot of decisions that were made at higher levels that, you know, that looking back, you wonder why those decisions were made, or you don't agree with them, and you think that, you know, people were hurt or injured and things like that because of those decisions that were made. But you know, I guess you go across you come across a lot of different leaders and things like that, people who are in those kind of decision-making positions, and you ask yourself, you know, and when you're in a position where you have to make a decision, you know, right or wrong, you ask yourself, you know, a person may not have to come back to you and say, no, you know, I guess how am I trying to phrase this? There's a difference between being able to, you know, like as a younger Marine, as somebody in the chain of command and things like that, you don't necessarily get a chance to question the decisions that are made above your pay grade, but you should always be able to understand them in some way. You know, I feel, you know, whenever I was in a leadership position or whenever I had to make a decision, I always felt that it's important to be able to explain yourself, to explain exactly what you did and why you did it, and that you should be able to make people understand that that's what part of being a good leader is. You know, they may not be able to, you know, you're the one who's in charge. They may not be able to question you or things like that, but you should be able to at least explain yourself and explain the different choices you made.